In the copper kingdom of Zira, the sun did not simply shine, it ruled. Its light poured down in molten waves, turning the rooftops into mirrors of fire and the streets into rivers of dust and glare. Everything in Zira shimmered, from the golden domes of the nobles' halls to the eyes of beggars who dreamed of coins. In this land, love was not spoken of, it was traded, weighed, and measured like any other precious metal. Mothers sold daughters for survival, sons sold honor for status, and the clang of currency was the true heartbeat of the kingdom. Naya had grown up hearing that sound her whole life. The ring of gold in her stepmother's hands, the soft whisper of silver at the market stalls, the harsh chime of copper coins being counted while the poor waited for crumbs. But her mother, before she died, had taught her another rhythm, the rustle of leaves and wind, the pulse of rivers beneath the soil, the breath of a world untouched by greed. It was that rhythm she clung to after her father passed, leaving her in the care of Adira, a woman whose beauty was matched only by the cold gleam in her eyes. Adira's eyes were the color of old coins, dull but calculating. She had married Naya's father for his shop, his savings, and the small inheritance he'd left behind. Once that was gone, affection drained from her like water from cracked stone. She kept Naya not out of love but out of convenience. The girl could cook, clean, and barter at the market. She was quiet and quick-handed, with a grace that made people look twice. Sometimes Adira caught strangers admiring Naya's kindness, and each glance made her jaw tighten. Beauty, after all, was just another kind of wealth, and Adira despised anything she could not own completely. Then the famine came. The sky refused to rain, the wells shrank to mud, and Zira's gilded pride began to rot from within. People tore copper sheets from their roofs to trade for grain. Markets turned into graveyards of hope. The queen's taxes grew harsher as the nobles hoarded food, and the commoner's hunger became a low, constant hum beneath the city's golden towers. Adira's savings dwindled until she had nothing left but her bitterness and the girl she resented more with each passing day. One night, as the wind howled dry and cruel outside, Adira stared at the last loaf of bread on the table and at Naya's sleeping face by the dying fire. The girl's skin still glowed with youth despite the hunger, her hair still held light even in darkness. "You'll survive anywhere," Adira murmured, a lie meant for her own comfort. The next morning, she dressed Naya in her cleanest clothes and braided her hair. When Naya asked where they were going, Adira smiled too brightly and said, "To the market. Someone there can give us what we need." The marketplace of Zira was emptier than usual, its stalls stripped bare, its people hollow-eyed. A caravan had arrived that morning from the southern trade roads, its merchants promising exotic goods, spices, oils, fabrics, and slaves. Among them was a tall man with desert dust on his cloak and a coin pouch that gleamed like salvation. Adira led Naya to him, her hand trembling slightly as she spoke. "She's strong, quiet, and clever. You'll get your worth 100-fold. Naya blinked, confused at first. The words didn't make sense. Then she saw the merchant's gaze, coldly appraising, counting, not seeing her as a girl but as a price. Her stomach turned. "Stepmother?" she whispered. Adira avoided her eyes, holding out her hand. The merchant dropped a single silver coin into her palm. The sound of it hitting skin was louder than thunder. Naya felt her world crack like a clay pot. For a heartbeat she couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, to grab Adira's wrist and shake her awake, to make her remember love. But there was nothing to reach for. Adira's face was set in iron. "It's for survival," she said, not meeting her gaze. "We all have to give something." The merchant's men stepped forward. Naya's lips trembled as she was pulled away, dust rising around her bare feet. She looked back once, her stepmother already turning away, silver coin clutched tight, her figure small against the burning light. "You've traded blood for metal," Naya said, voice breaking. "May it weigh upon your soul." Adira flinched, but she didn't turn. The caravan left Zira by sunset, heading toward the desert roads. The sky burned red as if mourning something precious. Naya sat in the back of a wagon filled with woven baskets and spice jars, her wrists bound loosely with rope. The merchant sat nearby, silent, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her. There was no cruelty in his gaze, only weariness. When night fell and the stars began to glimmer like eyes of forgotten gods, Naya whispered into the darkness, "Mother, if you can hear me, tell me what to do." The desert wind answered with a soft sigh. Somewhere far behind her, in the city of copper and greed, Adira held her coin close, unable to sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she thought she heard her stepdaughter's voice echoing through the silence, the words heavy like the coin itself, "May it weigh upon your soul." By dawn, Naya's tears had dried. The wagon wheels creaked forward, and the horizon stretched wide before her. Somewhere beyond that endless sand lay her fate. The desert roads of Zero were known for their cruelty, but also, sometimes, for the miracles born from it. And though Naya didn't yet know it, the coin that bought her freedom and pain would one day return, not as silver but as a crown forged from everything she'd lost. Adira's house had never looked so empty. The air felt lighter without Naya's quiet footsteps, but it was the kind of lightness that followed loss, the silence after a storm, the hollowness that settles when something living has been ripped away. Still, Adira pretended she didn't feel it. She stood before her cracked mirror, holding the silver coin in her palm, letting the light strike it again and again. It shimmered like liquid moonlight, perfect and pure, untouched by guilt. She told herself it was just a coin. Metal. Nothing more. Yet when she closed her fingers around it, her heart gave a faint tremor. That same afternoon she went to the market, what little of it remained after the famine. There she saw a bolt of deep red fabric imported from the western ports. It gleamed like royal wine, soft as whispering wind. Without hesitation she traded the coin for it. The merchant wrapped it carefully and bowed. Adira's chin lifted as she walked home, her new prize pressed against her chest. That night she sewed it into a shawl. Her fingers worked fast, the needle dancing under the dim lamplight. By dawn she stood before the mirror draped in her creation, a queen of her own making. The silk fell in waves down her shoulders, shining against her skin. For a moment she felt alive again, her reflection regal and whole. Then she heard it. At first it was soft, barely a breath, a sound just under the hum of morning. A voice, faint and trembling, like a memory breaking through time. You've traded blood for metal. May it weigh upon your soul. Adira froze. Her sewing needle clattered to the floor. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only silence. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. Hunger makes ghosts, she muttered. She folded the shawl away. But when night fell and she put it back on, the whisper returned. Sometimes it was Naya's voice crying softly, other times just a sigh like wind through glass. Once, Adira swore she felt the shawl grow heavy, as though something unseen pressed down upon her shoulders. She tore it off, gasping, her hands trembling. But by morning she would always reach for it again. She couldn't help herself. It was beautiful, her single indulgence in a world stripped bare. And each time she wore it she paid the same price. A whisper, a shiver, a guilt she could not silence. Far from Zira, beyond the desert where the dunes rippled like molten gold, the merchant's caravan stopped near an oasis. The air smelled of salt and dust, and palm trees swayed gently beside a pool of still water. The merchant, who had once dealt in slaves and salt alike, sat by his fire watching Naya from afar. She sat quietly, her wrists unbound now, her gaze fixed on the stars. There was something in her stillness that unsettled him. It wasn't fear, it was the absence of it. Most who were sold into servitude wept, begged, or tried to run. Naya did none of those things. She simply waited as though she knew her life wasn't over yet. By dawn the merchant had made his choice. He sold her, not to the slave markets of the southern cities, but to a caravan of jewel-makers traveling east. Their leader, an older woman named Quito, paid him with 3 small gems and a promise. She will work with her hands, not suffer under chains. The merchant nodded. That is enough, he said, perhaps speaking more to himself than to her. Under Quito's caravan, Naya's days found rhythm again. She learned to melt silver and gold in clay crucibles, to hammer thin sheets of metal into delicate filigree, to set gemstones that caught the sun like drops of fire. Her hands, once soft, grew strong and sure. Her eyes learned to read heat and shimmer, to see beauty in brokenness. Sometimes, when she touched molten silver, it reminded her of the coin, the one that had bought her away from home. She could almost hear its hiss as it melted, feel its betrayal in the heat. But she never let herself be consumed by anger. Instead she turned it into craft. You have steady hands, Quito told her one evening, watching her shape a thin wire of gold into the curve of a leaf. Steady hands come from a steady heart. Naya smiled faintly. Or a heart that refuses to break. That night she stayed up long after the others slept. The stars above the desert burned clear and close, their light cold but alive. She took a small fragment of silver, a leftover droplet from her day's work, and melted it again. When it cooled, she shaped it into a single round bead, smooth and simple. As she held it, the metal gleamed faintly in her palm, catching the starlight like it remembered something. This is what you sold me for, she whispered to the memory of her stepmother. But I'll make something greater than pain from it. She strung the bead onto a thin cord and tied it around her neck. It wasn't jewelry. It was a vow. From that night on, Naya's work changed. Her designs grew more intricate, her touch more confident. The other jewel makers began calling her the girl with light in her hands. Traders who saw her work swore her pieces shimmered differently under moonlight, as if the silver itself was alive. And though she smiled at their praise, Naya kept one truth to herself: the silver did live. It carried a fragment of her story, her loss, her promise. Sometimes, when she worked late into the night, she imagined she could feel the desert breathing around her, whispering secrets into her forge. She would close her eyes and listen, not to the crackle of the fire, but to the faintest echo beneath it, like a voice carried on wind. It wasn't sorrow anymore. It was strength. Back in Zira, Adira's whispers had grown louder. The red shawl, once her pride, now felt cursed. When she tried to burn it, the fire refused to catch. When she buried it, the earth spat it back by morning. At last she locked it away, trembling, whispering Naya's name in the dark. But the coin she'd spent was gone, its journey no longer hers to follow. Somewhere under a sky filled with unblinking stars, Naya sat by her forge, the silver bead glowing softly at her throat. She touched it once before sleeping, whispering not in anger this time, but in quiet determination. "I'll make something worthy of this betrayal," she said. And the desert wind, carrying 1,000 forgotten prayers, answered her vow with silence, the kind that promises it has been heard. The years moved like drifting sand, silent and unstoppable. Naya grew from a broken girl into a woman the world whispered about but never truly knew. In the desert kingdom of Kerith, her name was spoken in markets and royal courts alike. The silver-handed smith, the one whose creations shimmered like moonlight resting on still water. She worked in a forge carved into stone, where heat pulsed like a living thing. The air shimmered with light and sound, the hiss of molten silver, the hum of her hammer's rhythm. Those who came to her door never asked for her past, and she never offered it. Naya had long ago buried her name beneath the weight of her own making. Nobles and traders arrived from distant cities to commission her work. They left with pieces that glowed faintly even in shadow, bracelets that pulsed like veins of light, pendants that reflected not faces but dreams. They called her the artisan of tears, though no one knew why. When asked what inspired her art, she only smiled and said, "Memory burns hotter than fire." Yet for all her fame, she lived in solitude. Her workshop stood apart from the caravan city, perched on a dune that overlooked the endless horizon. Every night she would step outside, let the desert wind brush her face and whisper to the stars. She still wore the small silver bead around her neck, melted from the coin that once sold her life away. It had dulled with years, yet it pulsed faintly with warmth as if remembering her heartbeat. Sometimes she would close her eyes and remember her stepmother's eyes, cold, gleaming like the coin that had sealed her fate. But anger no longer lived in her. It had become something else, something tempered, like metal that had known flame and survived. One night the dreams returned. In her sleep she stood before her forge, though it burned with no fire. The air was filled with light, not from the flames but from the silver bead at her throat. It glowed brighter and brighter until the entire room shone like the inside of a star. Then she heard it. A voice, soft and steady, neither human nor divine. "Your worth is not what they sold," it said. "It is what you forge." Naya opened her mouth to speak, but her voice did not come, only the sound of a hammer striking metal again and again. When she woke, her forge was cold but her chest was warm. The bead at her throat had begun to glow faintly again, just as it had the night she first shaped it. She rose without hesitation. The dream was a summons. For 3 days and nights, Naya worked without rest. Her forge came alive, the flames dancing in colors unseen before, blue, white, and pale gold. The sound of her hammer rang through the dunes like distant thunder. She melted silver and gold, mixing them in a crucible of obsidian. She added shards of moonstone, fragments of crystal found in the desert wind, and a sliver of her own blood, a promise bound in heat. Her hands moved as if guided by something greater than herself. She did not sketch, did not plan, she simply knew. Every curve, every line, every fold of metal formed with perfect intent. As the days passed, her apprentices came to the door, drawn by the strange light spilling from within. But none dared enter. They heard her humming softly, an old tune that carried through the smoke, the same lullaby she used to sing to the stars as a child. And from the heart of the forge, something magnificent took shape. When Naya finally stepped out, she held in her hands a crown. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen, delicate as mist, fierce as lightning. Its frame curved like a teardrop, its arches flowing like water frozen in motion. At its center gleamed a core of silver so pure it seemed to hold light inside it, the heart of that single coin. She placed it on the anvil, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to weep. Not from sorrow but from release. That one coin, that symbol of betrayal and worthlessness, had become something sacred. She had taken the weight of her suffering and turned it into radiance. What had once been payment for her soul was now the proof of it. The news of the crown spread across kingdoms. Envoys arrived with gifts and gold, offering fortunes for a glimpse, a touch, a claim. Naya refused them all. "This," she said, her fingers brushing the silver light, "is not for sale. It was never yours to buy." That night she placed the crown beneath the open sky. The moon rose high, and for a moment, its light met the crown's glow. They merged, silver upon silver, until it seemed the heavens themselves bowed in reflection. The bead at her neck pulsed once more, brighter than ever before, and then went still. Naya understood. The coin's journey was complete. She whispered, "From the price of my life, I have forged its worth." And the desert wind, ancient, watchful, answered with a sigh that sounded almost like applause. In Zira, far away, Adira awoke one night to find her room flooded with silver light. The red shawl she had hidden for years now shimmered where it lay, alive again. For a fleeting instant she saw Naya's face in the glow, calm, radiant, crowned in starlight. Then the light vanished, and only the faint echo of hammer and song remained. Adira fell to her knees, whispering her daughter's name, but the sound dissolved into silence. Back in the forge, Naya sat by her anvil as dawn broke over the dunes. The crown gleamed beside her, not heavy with pride but light with peace. She touched the cooled metal and smiled faintly. The journey that began with betrayal had ended in creation. And though her hands were scarred and her heart long-tempered, the fire within her had never dimmed. The world might measure worth in gold and coin, but she had learned a deeper truth. Worth was not given. It was forged. The summons arrived at dawn, a royal decree sealed in crimson wax, bearing the mark of the sun-crowned serpent. The messenger bowed deeply and spoke the words every artisan in the kingdom dreamed of hearing. "By order of Her Majesty Queen of Zira, your presence is required in the royal court." Naya stood silently in the doorway of her forge, the paper trembling between her fingers. The fire behind her hissed and flared, as if it too felt the weight of what was coming. She had crafted treasures for nobles, priests, even foreign lords, but never for the crown of Zira itself. Still, her heart did not quicken in pride. It pulsed with something quieter, sharper, a strange ache she could not name. She packed her tools and the half-finished crown, wrapping it in linen darkened by the smoke of her forge. When she touched the crown's silver core, it throbbed faintly, almost as if it were breathing. She frowned, not in fear but in recognition. The metal had memory, it remembered every hammer strike, every tear that had fallen during its making. By dusk she set out for the capital. The kingdom of Zira shimmered beneath the sun like a dying ember, once proud, now crumbling under the weight of its greed. Gold-plated gates gleamed, but the streets beyond them were cracked and hungry. Rumors had spread for months that the queen was ill, her body failing even as her court feasted louder to drown the sound of decay. In the palace, nobles whispered of succession. Who would take the throne once the old queen fell? Some demanded a new symbol, a crown reborn, one that would wash away the shame of famine and false piety. And so the queen had commanded, "Let a new crown be made, not of gold but of light itself." It was a decree that traveled faster than wind, reaching even the edges of the desert where Naya's forge stood. When she entered the palace she did not look like the others summoned that day, the goldsmiths with their jeweled aprons, the gem cutters who wore their work as pride. Naya came in a simple cloak, the scent of ash still clinging to her skin, her hands calloused from labor. Yet the guards who led her through the marble halls found themselves stepping softer, as though she carried something sacred. The air grew colder as she approached the throne room. And there, among the queen's attendants, stood a woman whose presence struck Naya like the memory of an old wound. Adira. Her stepmother, older now, her beauty dulled but her eyes unchanged. They still glinted like coins, sharp and watchful. Once, those eyes had looked upon Naya as if she were nothing more than something to be spent. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Adira's face drained of color. The tray in her hands slipped, the sound of shattering glass echoing across the chamber. Naya said nothing. Her silence was heavier than rage. At the far end of the hall, the Queen of Zira sat on her throne, veiled in silk, her skin pale as parchment. She regarded Naya with an expression both weary and regal. "So you are the silversmith they speak of?" the queen said, her voice thin but laced with power. "They say your work shines purer than gold." Naya bowed deeply, the linen bundle still clutched in her hands. "Your Majesty honors me." "Show me," the queen commanded. Naya knelt and unwrapped the crown. The hall filled with a soft, silvery glow. Even the torches seemed to bow their flames lower, as if in reverence. The crown was unfinished, its frame complete but its heart open, waiting. The core of pure silver pulsed faintly like a slow heartbeat, alive beneath the metal's surface. Gasps rippled through the room. The courtiers murmured. Even the queen leaned forward, eyes widening. "This light," she whispered. "It breathes." Naya nodded once. "Because it remembers," she said softly. The queen studied her. "What do you mean?" Naya looked up, and for the first time since entering the palace, her voice carried something of her past, steady, sorrowful, unbreakable. "Every piece of metal remembers the fire that shaped it. Every crown remembers what it cost to be made." The queen regarded her with quiet wonder, unaware of the storm behind her throne, Adira trembling in the shadows, her heart pounding like a guilty drum. For the first time she saw what her coin had become. Not mere silver, but something divine. As the audience ended, the queen gave her order. "Finish it," she said, "and you shall craft not just my crown but the soul of Zira." Naya bowed once more. But before she turned to leave, her gaze fell briefly upon Adira, who stood frozen, clutching her shaking hands. Their eyes met, mother and daughter, seller and sold, flame and shadow. Naya said nothing. She did not need to. The pulse of the crown between her fingers spoke for her, steady, alive, merciful. When she walked from the chamber, the faint light from the crown's silver heart spilled across the marble, catching the queen's gaze, catching Adira's tears, and for the first time in many years, Zira's palace felt warm. The queen's decree struck the hall like thunder. 3 days. 3 days to complete a crown meant to outshine the gods themselves. The courtiers whispered, glancing toward the young silversmith who neither bowed nor begged. Naya only nodded once, her face calm, though inside her heart felt like a bell tolling through a storm. She was given a chamber near the royal forge, a place once used to craft ceremonial weapons, now silent, filled only with dust and shadows. When she entered, the air tasted of old fire and iron. She laid her tools down gently, one by one, on a table worn smooth by generations of smiths. Then she unwrapped the half-finished crown. Its silver core shimmered faintly even in the dark, as if it were alive, breathing, waiting. Outside, the queen's guards locked the heavy doors. 3 days, one said coldly. No longer. Naya's gaze did not waver. 3 days, she repeated, then turned back to her forge. That night the flames spoke. When Naya lit the fire, the silver bead she carried, the one remnant of the coin she had been sold for, began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could almost hear it whispering through the heat, a soft echo of her mother's voice. Forge what they tried to break. Each strike of her hammer rang like a prayer. Sparks leapt and vanished, painting constellations across the chamber walls. The scent of molten metal filled her lungs, heavy and sharp. Sweat rolled down her back, mixing with the soot that clung to her arms. But beneath her focus, another memory lingered. The day she was sold, the cold weight of her stepmother's hand pushing her toward the merchant's cart. The flash of that single coin glinting in the sun. It had been meant to erase her. Now it was becoming her vengeance, not in blood but in beauty. On the second night, as the moon rose pale and thin, the door creaked open. Adira stepped inside. She had waited until the guards fell asleep, her silken slippers soundless against the stone. The crown lay half-finished on the anvil, its frame glowing with an inner light that seemed to breathe. She stared at it, transfixed, a piece of her past and her crime reborn in silver and fire. Her trembling hands reached toward the forge table. From within her cloak, she drew a small pouch of grayish metal, cheap tin. If she could swap the silver, the crown would collapse, Naya would be disgraced, and perhaps the queen's favor might shift to her. But when her fingers brushed the silver pieces, a sudden wind rose, though the forge was sealed. The flame surged white-hot, roaring like a living creature. Adira stumbled back, shielding her face. The fire did not burn her, but it looked at her, bright and knowing, the way Naya once had. The tin in her hand melted instantly, dripping like tears of shame onto the floor. Adira fled, her breath breaking into sobs as the sound of hammering resumed behind her, steady, merciless, holy. By dawn, the air around the forge trembled. Naya stood before her creation, her body weak, her eyes bright with exhaustion and awe. The crown was complete. It gleamed with a light that seemed to come from within, not fire, not reflection, but something deeper, older. The silver core at its heart pulsed softly, whispering like a living thing. If one listened closely, one could almost hear words, not spoken but felt. I remember the fire. I remember the pain. I am whole. Naya sank to her knees, the hammer slipping from her hand. The forge had gone silent, but the crown still hummed gently as if alive, the heartbeat of metal reborn. And in that quiet, Naya smiled faintly through her exhaustion. The coin that once bought her suffering had become a crown that breathed light. Some debts, it seemed, were repaid not in gold, but in the purity of creation itself. The day of Naya's coronation dawned unlike any other in Zira's long history. The sun broke through the horizon not as gold, but as pale silver, its light scattering across the rooftops like molten truth. The city, once obsessed with the glimmer of metal and the sound of coins, now stirred to a different kind of music, the ringing of hammers from every forge echoing Naya's name. From the palace balcony, the queen stood beside her, her old crown resting in her hands, her eyes bright with something close to awe. The square below overflowed with people. Traders, miners, nobles, and beggars all gathered together. For the first time there were no chains among them. The royal herald lifted his staff, but his voice trembled as he began, "People of Zira, behold the one who was sold for silver, yet returned with light." A hush fell. Naya stepped forward, the silver crown cradled in her hands. The morning air was cool against her skin, but her heart was steady. The crown pulsed faintly as if alive, as if remembering every beat of her journey, every forge fire, every night of grief and endurance. The queen turned to her and said softly, "Zira's throne belongs not to those born of gold, but to those forged by truth." Then she lifted the silver crown and placed it upon Naya's head. At once the world seemed to exhale. The light from the crown spread outward like a ripple across still water, washing over the crowd. People gasped. It was not blinding but gentle, warm, and alive. The poor felt it like a hand on their shoulder, the rich felt it like a weight on their hearts. The queen knelt first. Then one by one, every person followed, until the whole city bowed before the girl once deemed worthless. Naya raised her hand, her voice carrying through the silence. "Rise," she said. "Zira will kneel to no one but compassion." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and then applause, wild and free, like thunder rolling through the mountains. Children danced in the dust. Women wept. Men beat their chests and threw coins into the air, shouting, "No more chains. No more blood for silver." From that day Zira changed. Naya's first decree was simple: no human shall be bought or sold again. The slave markets were torn down stone by stone, and the gold altars in the temples were melted to make tools for the builders. Her second decree was written not in ink but in iron: wealth serves the heart, not rules it. The queen herself laid down her throne beside Naya's, serving as her advisor until her dying breath. Naya built homes for the poor and orphaned, wide, sunlit spaces she called the houses of forged light. Each house had a forge at its center where people could learn to shape metal, not as currency but as creation. "Let every hand that suffered learn to make something that endures," she would say, her voice gentle but resolute. In those houses, the glow of the forges replaced the cold glitter of coins. Children molded scraps of silver into birds and stars, saying they were gifts for the queen who was once sold. The nobles whispered in their marble halls, uncertain what to make of her. A ruler who refused tribute, who walked among the people barefoot, who bowed to blacksmiths and fed strangers with her own hands. Yet none could deny her power. The silver crown gleamed faintly even in darkness, and those who looked into it swore they saw reflections of their own hearts. Stories of her spread beyond Zira, carried by traders, wanderers, and wind. In distant lands they called her the forged queen, the lady of silver mercy, the girl who weighed the world and found it wanting. And sometimes, under the soft light of a crescent moon, when people worked the forges or sang in the fields, they claimed they could still hear her voice, calm, steady, bright, reminding them that worth was never measured by gold, but by the hands that dared to create after being broken. The girl sold for a coin had risen not just to rule a kingdom but to heal its soul. And her name, whispered with reverence, outshone every jewel in Zira. The years had not been kind to Adira. Once draped in silks and shaded by servants, she now walked barefoot through the dust of Zira's outskirts, her once smooth hands cracked like old clay. Her hair hung in dull strands streaked with gray, and her eyes, once sharp and golden, had dulled into the color of tarnished bronze. No one recognized her anymore. The kingdom she had betrayed had changed beyond her reach. The markets she once ruled with her vanity now sang with laughter and freedom. The forges glowed not for greed but for creation. And every coin that changed hands bore the mark of Naya's reign, a small silver tear engraved with the words, "Worth is forged, not sold." Adira had not dared to step inside the city for years. Whispers of the forged queen haunted her, not from anger but from shame. She slept beneath bridges, begged for food, and avoided her reflection in the river. For whenever she looked into the water, she thought she saw Naya's face staring back, not with hatred but with unbearable pity. One evening, as the sun bled into the desert, Adira stumbled upon something half buried in the sand. A faint glimmer caught her eye, a flash of silver beneath her torn feet. She knelt and dug it out. It was a single silver coin. Weathered, yet unmistakably familiar. The same slight dent at the edge, the same faint mark across its surface. The very coin she had once clutched with trembling greed when she sold her stepdaughter all those years ago. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered. "It cannot be." She turned it over in her palm, half in disbelief, half in terror. The metal felt strangely warm, too warm. Driven by hunger and desperation, she stumbled toward the nearest town. "Please," she rasped to a merchant. "Take it. Just a crust of bread." But the man recoiled. "What trickery is this? Your coin glows red." Adira looked down. The silver in her hand had begun to shimmer, not with light but with fire. It pulsed, alive, a living ember of memory. The coin burned into her skin, searing its round imprint into her palm. She cried out, dropping it, but it did not fall. It clung to her flesh as if fused, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. "Forgive me," she screamed, clawing at the dirt. "I was hungry. I didn't know." The wind howled across the plain, carrying her words into silence. In the distance, the towers of Zira glimmered beneath the moonlight, and for a fleeting moment she saw the faint reflection of the crown her daughter wore, radiant and merciful. The burning eased. The coin cooled. Adira fell to her knees, sobbing into her blistered hands. "Naya, my child," she whispered. "I sold you for silver, but silver remembers." The wind carried her cry softly toward the city. Somewhere within its walls a forge flickered, and for an instant the flame burned brighter as if in quiet acknowledgement. By dawn Adira was gone. All that remained where she knelt was a single silver coin resting peacefully in the dust, gleaming like a tear beneath the rising sun. That night, as the moon hung low over Zira, Naya dreamed. The palace was silent, the air thick with the scent of metal and jasmine. She stood within the great hall where the forges once roared, and before her, suspended in midair, floated a single silver coin. It spun slowly, weightless, glowing with a soft, mournful light. She knew it instantly. The same coin that had bought her suffering. The same coin that had shaped her destiny. It drifted toward her like a memory returning home. Each turn shimmered with fragments of the past. Her stepmother's trembling hands, the desert wind, the caravan's dust, the firelight that once reflected in her tears. She wanted to turn away but could not. The coin spoke without words. It pulsed with warmth like a heartbeat. It carried no anger, only quiet understanding, as if the metal itself had endured its own journey of redemption. Naya reached out, her fingers trembling. The moment she touched it, the coin melted into light. The radiance flowed through her veins, and the silver streams of her crown began to glow. The melted light climbed the air like smoke, merging into the heart of the crown until it blazed brighter than it ever had before. Her breath caught. A single tear rolled down her cheek, gleaming silver as it fell. In that instant she understood. Forgiveness was the final act of alchemy, the transformation no forge could teach. The true crown was not metal nor was it power. It was mercy, the ability to let go of what had broken you and still shine. Naya felt her heart expand, warm and steady, like the hum of creation itself. Images flickered in her mind, the faces of the people she had healed, the children laughing in the houses of forged light, the quiet prayers whispered to her name. And somewhere, faint and distant, she saw a figure kneeling in the dust, her stepmother's face lifted toward the sky, her tears mixing with sand. Naya did not curse her. Instead, she whispered softly into the dream, her voice carried by starlight, "Be free." The crown upon her head shimmered with a halo of molten silver, its glow spreading like dawn through the hall. The walls reflected her light, and for a heartbeat, the entire palace seemed to breathe, as if the metal, the stones, even the air itself had found peace. When Naya awoke, the glow still lingered faintly around her crown. She looked toward the open window where the first rays of morning touched the sky. A single silver glint fell from the heavens, landing silently on her palm, not a coin but a droplet of light. She smiled. Her heart, once sold and scarred, now beat whole again, not from vengeance but from release. They sold her for silver, thinking her value small. But silver remembers, it bends, it burns, it becomes. She was the coin, the forge, and the crown. And through her, mercy found its throne. So the story closes, not with a cry of vengeance but with the quiet hum of rebirth. At dawn, the kingdom of Zira awakens beneath a sky of molten gold and soft rose light. The palace spires gleam, catching the first breath of the sun, and atop them rests the crown that once lived as sorrow, then became forgiveness. Its silver heart shimmers with quiet fire, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the land itself. Farmers lift their eyes as they tend the fields, watching the light spread across the hills. Merchants pause in the streets as the morning glow brushes their faces. Even the poorest in the alleys feel warmth ripple through the air, not from wealth or gold but from something purer. A story has taken root in every soul. They whisper it to their children who will whisper it again when they grow. Once there was a girl sold for a single coin, and from that coin she built a crown that no empire could tarnish. In the house of forged light, a young blacksmith hums an old tune while shaping metal. The melody sounds strangely familiar, a song of healing, of rising, of remembering. And for a moment, it seems as if the crown itself hums back, resonating softly in time with his heartbeat. High within the palace, the crown rests upon a pedestal of marble. Its glow never fades, not even in darkness. On still nights, those who pass by swear they hear a faint echo, the sound of a forge's flame, the whisper of a mother's love, the soft clinking of a single coin returning home. No ruler dares wear it, for all know it does not belong to any throne of man. It belongs to the memory of a girl who refused to be owned, to the truth that no price can measure a soul's worth. And as the sun climbs higher, its light floods through the open windows, striking the crown once more. The silver catches fire, not a consuming blaze, but a radiant bloom that dances across the walls and rooftops of Zira. The city seems to awaken with it, alive and shining. Somewhere in the hush between the wind and the dawn, a voice lingers, not loud, not ghostly, just steady, like the echo of a heartbeat within the earth. I was the coin. I was the fire. I was the crown. The light stretches beyond the palace, spilling across the deserts and rivers, until even the horizon gleams. And so the crown still shines, eternal, unbroken, a reminder that even what is sold can be reborn and that mercy once forged never fades.